The purpose of remorse is to reflect and to be a better person so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Because your redemption arc didn't end, and it's not ending today. It's going to end one day when you have no more days left to live. Maybe you could be kinder to yourself when you're on your case about everything. Welcome to How to Be an Adult, a podcast created by the team at the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada, where we make hypnosis make sense. We offer practical guidance for people just like you who've inadvertently become adults and don't know what to do about it. Whether you're 18 or 80, this show is the trail guide to life that no one gave to you when you gained equality with your parents. We share our thoughts in public to democratize self-assurance, self-love, and self-respect. I'm Luke Chow. This episode, I'm going to talk about how to overcome guilt and shame, how to forgive yourself, and how to move on from past transgressions, either actual or imagined. Let me differentiate guilt and shame because they're similar feelings. Guilt is the feeling you feel when you believe you've done something that's wrongful. But it doesn't cut as deep because a good person can do something that's wrongful and then apologize for it. Shame is much deeper. Shame is the feeling that at your core, you are a bad person, that you're a flawed person. And sometimes people get stuck in that shame because if at your core you're a bad person, then there's nothing you can say or do to redeem yourself. And I want to challenge that idea. If the title of this episode is appealing to you and you've tuned in and you're listening this far, probably you're not one of the ones we have to worry about. Probably you're not someone who needs to walk down the street looking over your shoulder in case the ghosts of your past catch up with you. The kinds of people who are a menace to society, the kinds of people who we can actually say are bad, don't reflect so much and don't have so much remorse and don't feel as much guilt or shame. My second point, and if you're an enjoyer of literature or movies, you'll kind of understand this especially, it's to recognize where you are in your redemption arc. So if we're watching a movie or a play or we're reading a book, and in Act 1 of the story, there's someone who's done something wrongful. Then there's a chance that by Act 2 or by Act 3, the person who had committed that crime or act of villainy has redeemed themselves. And we kind of look for this in movies and literature. Of course, the totally unredeemable fall into a volcano at the end of the movie, right? For those who don't fall into the volcano, there is a chance at redemption. You want to recognize if you're in Act 1 or 2 of your life, even if you're starting Act 3 of your life, then your redemption arc is not yet complete. You have a chance to make amends, to apologize, to contribute to society, to make up for wrongdoings of the past. And, well, any of those actions will be far more fruitful than wallowing in your shame and in your guilt. One of the reasons I chose this topic for this episode is I have a client who's very young, and this one client is remorseful for things that they had done in very early childhood. It kind of prompted me to think that, well, elsewhere, I've got clients who are in their 20s, and they regret things they did or said when they were in their teens. And then I've got other clients in their 30s and 40s, and they realize they're imperfect, they're flawed, and they have to make amends for things that they had done when they were in their 20s. And I've got other clients who are in their 50s, and that's when they reach a point where they want to be better people, often for their kids, but they want to be better people and not to repeat the mistakes of the past. And I've got other clients who are in their 70s, and they wish they had conducted themselves better when they were in their 50s and 60s. This is what I mean by your redemption arc is not yet complete. Even if you kicked a puppy when you were 12 years old, you can run a dog shelter when you're 60 years old. Even if you yelled at your younger brother too many times when you're supposed to babysit your younger brother, Well, if that younger brother's still in your life, you have a chance to apologize, to set things right, to heal some of the pain for him, and to thereby redeem yourself so that you don't have to live with so much guilt and shame. To bring this point to a head, if you feel like you're always evolving and you're always learning more things and you're always cringing at social faux pas or career mistakes you've made previously in life, you're actually living a normal and healthy adult life. Once we interrogate our emotions and why we feel what we feel, we can recognize that seldomly is an emotion just outright bad, with no purpose. The purpose of remorse, I would suggest, is to make you into a better person. It's to have you reflect upon how you can be a better person tomorrow. Just like we go through grade 1 so that we don't have to learn the lessons of grade 1 again and we can move on to grade 2. And you're a lifelong learner. You can always look back and if you're prone to cringing, you might cringe at things you did or thought or said, even in the recent past. If you're beyond just prone to cringing, if you tend to be very self-critical, you can absolutely find things to criticize yourself for. And this is just part and parcel with learning for life. But we don't judge the grade 3 student based on what they did in kindergarten because we recognize their progress. We don't judge the grade 6 student based on how they did in grade 3 because we recognize 3 whole years of progress. And it wouldn't be fair to judge you today based on what you did last year or last decade or 30 years ago. So I want to reframe for you so-called failure and the shame and the guilt that follows from that. One mistake we often make categorically when we think of ourselves is we imagine ourselves to be like manufactured objects. So childhood and school should have manufactured us into an adult, and we arrive at adulthood at the age of 18, and we're supposed to know everything. We're supposed to be able to do everything at that point. We're supposed to be perfect, and then we degrade from there, because that's how we treat a new iPhone. An iPhone comes out of the factory pretty much as perfect as it's ever going to be, and it's not going to get any better, and it degrades from there. But you're not an iPhone. You're a living human being. And the way life works is we start in our absolute least developed form. We are born into total ignorance, knowing absolutely nothing whatsoever. And then through the years, we learn, we develop, we grow. So every majestic oak tree starts as a little acorn, and the acorn has to go through this sapling phase and eventually grow a strong trunk before it's an oak tree. But even once it becomes a mature oak tree, it's still going to regrow its leaves in the springtime. It is still going to reach up toward the sun as long as it's alive. And that is how we human beings are like. If you're prone more to shame than to guilt, so if you believe that at your core you're a bad person, you're an irredeemable person, then this message about being like the oak tree is especially for you. Because if the oak tree loses its leaves in the wintertime, it's not a bad oak tree. As long as it's alive, it's going to regrow its leaves in the springtime. The purpose of remorse is to reflect and to be a better person so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past. It used to be that you would have a teacher or a parent telling you, no, red X. This one gets a green check mark. This one gets a red X. But in adulthood, you're going to be the one assessing your behaviors, your choices, your actions, and your words. So you want to emulate a good parent, a good teacher, while you are assessing whether you've done the right thing or said the right thing. And a good parent or teacher is not just going to nitpick your flaws or criticize what you did wrong. They're going to recognize, okay, well, the ideal person in this situation would have done this or said this, and that's the teaching lesson. The teaching lesson isn't that you're bad. Like, we don't even do this to dogs and cats if we know what we're doing with animals. So the lesson isn't that you're bad. The lesson is, here's what to do instead. Here's what to do next time. So you want your reflection to focus on what to do instead, what to do next time. If it keeps going back to, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm irredeemable, then you're stuck. There is no next step. If you're like, the iPhone 3 in 2025, right? The iPhone 3 is, worth like what, $20? Because there's no chance it's going to be an iPhone 16 in 2025. It's only an iPhone 3. But you have an entire future, and for most of you listening, it's a multi-decade timeline. And that's a lot of learning. That's a lot of growing. That's a lot of redeeming. If you have to apologize a lot, that's a lot of apologizing. But that's going to be your redemption arc, because your redemption arc didn't end, and it's not ending today. Once you're reflected enough, any further guilt and shame becomes cruel and unusual punishment, right? So we recognize if we teach the child what they ought to do, then that is how we help the child become a future citizen. But if we punish the child and they have no idea what they did wrong and they have no idea what to do next, that's just abusive. That's just cruel and unusual. Even if this was modeled for you when you were a child, well, now that you have your own conscience, I would suggest you can do better than your childhood caregivers. That raises the question of, when have you reflected enough? When have you thought about your wrongdoing enough? In my view, you reach that point of enough when you learned what you had to learn to the point where you know what to do next. When you know what to do next, you won't repeat the mistakes of the past. You only committed the mistakes of the past because it was not obvious to you how you should have handled the situation. So let's say you yell at a kid because you never learned emotional regulation, right? Well, the lesson, again, it's not that you're bad. It's, okay, well, maybe you have to take a few deep breaths, or you want to be feeling your heart before you speak to the kid. And then you're much less likely to speak out of anger. So if you're at the point where you've learned that, then you are going backwards, not forward, by feeling guilty and ashamed over and over again when the lesson's already been learned. That becomes cruel and unusual. It has no positive benefit to wallow in shame and to feel guilty forever if it's already clear to you what to do instead next time. The next point I'm going to make is that even criminals get second chances. Now, if no one's come to arrest you, now I bet if you feel bad about the thing you've done, you probably would feel a little better if someone came and arrested you. And then the judge decides, here's your sentence. It's 2 years of community service. And you do the 2 years of community service, and then you feel like you're a free man or a free woman again, and you can reintegrate into society. You would probably actually feel better if the criminal justice system did the punishment for you. But the thing is, whatever you're worried about, if you're listening to this episode, probably doesn't cross the threshold of a criminal act. So no one is coming to arrest you. Then why are you putting yourself in the prison of your mind for literally the rest of your life? Because we don't even do that to a murderer unless what they committed was much more egregious than the typical murder. When society has decided that what you did deserves no punishment, then maybe society is right. Society's punishments aside, let's come back to your conscience. Because if you're just thinking in your own head and trying to figure yourself out, then it is your conscience you're going to ask to figure out if you're already past a point of cruel and unusual punishment. So here's a standard to apply. Would you berate a friend this much for the same transgression? So if your friend yells at their kid once, you might be like, hey, what are you doing? Right? If a friend neglects their dog too much, you'll be like, hey, what are you doing? But then if they're, aware and you stop yelling at them, then that's your standard of what a person deserves after the transgression, right? So your conscience already knows that, you just say it once so your friend understands. And then if you witness that they're taking better care of those who are under their care, then you don't have to say it again. And you don't have to raise your voice again. If that's the standard, then that's the standard to apply to yourself, which is totally unhypocritical. Probably what you're doing instead is you're upholding a double standard where all your friends get a few sharp words if you witness them transgressing, and you get heaps of guilt and shame if you've witnessed yourself transgressing. And it's that double standard that I'm going to say is unnecessary. Probably you recognize for everyone else that joy, love, freedom, peace, happiness are positive sum. So if we have a criminal and they're already in prison, well, they can enjoy their time in prison. They don't absolutely have to spend their time in prison living in fear. That doesn't make a better future citizen one day when they're released. They should permit themselves moments of joy. They should permit themselves moments of love. Again, I'm exaggerating your transgressions so that you stop being so hard on yourself. You're also entitled to moments of joy. You're still entitled to moments of peace. You're still entitled to love. So if a friend does or says the same thing you did, and you find them to be forgivable, then you're forgivable according to your own conscience. And most things are forgivable once the sharp word has been spoken, once we're cognizant of what we did wrong and what we should do next time instead. And you're one of us. You're wholly a living human being. If you're listening to this, you're probably over the age of 18, so very few people even have the authority to be on your case about everything. I know you've kind of taken on this authority, so you're on your case about everything. But maybe you could apply more universal standards. Maybe you could be kinder to yourself when you're on your case about everything. This sounds like a cliche, but it's absolutely true. And that's why the things you did in Act 1 of your life can be redeemed and forgiven by Act 3 of your life. Rather than asking, what's wrong with me? Why am I so bad? Why am I such a bad person? Why am I so irredeemable? Because these kinds of self-shaming questions cannot produce answers that give you a next step to do next. So instead, ask, what kind of person do I want to be tomorrow? Because all your answers to the question of who do I want to be tomorrow, you could take action on. So rather than asking, how could I have been so terrible to have said that thing, done that thing, not said that thing, not done that thing, especially if you've thought about it for days, weeks, months, or years already, ask yourself, what are my values that I will uphold from this day on out? Ask yourself, what kind of values do I want to see in this world and which I can uphold through my words and actions? These questions give you answers you have a lot of use for. But the self-shaming questions do not give you answers, and I would even suggest have no chance of giving you answers that you can make use of. This is why we don't just shame someone without saying, here's what I wish you did instead. right? So stop treating yourself like a thing that is broken. Treat yourself as life to be nurtured. Life on an 80-plus year timeline of growth and maturing and adaptivity. Because that's who you are, really. As always, thank you for listening to this episode. Now, the next few minutes are going to be a little bit different than my usual episodes because I have 2 new announcements for how you might be able to hear more of the kinds of thoughts that originate from the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis. The purpose of our work, whether it's free YouTube videos or in-person sessions, it's to help you internalize the principles that we speak of as your own. We understand that not everyone has the wherewithal financially to do private sessions with me. So this episode, I'm announcing 2 ways to engage with us from anywhere in the world at a much lower cost than if you paid for my private time and attention. The first one is called the Self-Actualizers Club. It's a series of shared hypnosis sessions that are done live in Toronto and live streamed globally, which are intended to take you up the tiers in Maslow's hierarchy. This membership program also allows you to learn self-hypnosis, to practice public speaking in a group setting, to learn mindful eating when we have classes for mindful eating, and to generally be a much more well-rounded human being. To learn more, go to morpheusclinic.com/membership. If you like the kind of content we're putting out on our YouTube channel and this podcast, you might be interested in an app that we recently acquired called Hypnu, Hypnu. You can search for it in the App Store, or you can search for it in the Play Store if you're on Android, and you're going to see Morpheus Hypnosis Limited as the developer. Hypnu is an app that I contributed to as a practitioner for quite a number of years. And now that I own and operate the app, every single one of my recordings is free. Pascal, who you've seen in prior episodes, also has a free recording on Hypnu. If you want access to the other 20 hypnotists in English and German, you can pay a monthly subscription. But to hear me, almost all of my recordings are going to be free forever. And that's my gift to you so that you don't have to hear me on YouTube and risk an ad auto-playing after one of my videos. Thank you again for all your support. For more episodes of How to Be an Adult, subscribe on YouTube at Morpheus Hypnosis, or search for How to Be an Adult on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts.